very honored to be here, especially after this fantastic opening panel. I'm very honored to be here with Swern. You hear from my accent, I'm the European hire at Rutgers. And I will show you a big project we do in the transatlantic research group on walking, planning and aesthetic care. And talking about advertising New Jersey, I will show you how it's related to Switzerland. Who would have thought? So I hope this is it working? No, that's not working. I have to put this here. No, also not. How can I move the slide? It worked, of course, when we tried it. Which one do I have to use? Sorry. It's okay.
Is that where you want
Here, this one? Yeah, but how do I do the next one?
Just a little arrow down there.
Oh. Which
Sorry.
one? So where do I have to go? Oh, no,
My tech girl. Back here.
Okay, so I have to go into the slide again and it
It's working?
Yeah, it's
There you
working
go.
again, so I'm giving
Here
away
we
all
go.
of my
Okay.
good slides. So here we are. So this is us, our transatlantic research team, Dr. Anne Brandl, Kaspar Scherer, and myself. Anne is a spatial planner. Kaspar is an architect. I come from landscape architecture. We presented at two national Swiss landscape congresses in 2020 and 2022 and wrote a manifesto on walking in suburbia. In Switzerland, this is called agglomeration. This doesn't really exist here because the density is not as high as in Europe. When you are coming to suburbia, that's really an American feature. But basically, our manifesto says we walk, so we are. Everyone who can walk in suburbia. Walking in suburbia makes you aware. Walking in suburbia is a kind of resistance. Walking in suburbia really values the everyday. It makes you healthier. It reinforces public space, and we can only save biodiversity by walking in suburbia. So now I will unfold it why this is the case. Here we are. So I was hired here in 2016. In 2018, I gave a keynote, opening keynote for this Swiss Landscape Congress. And that's when I realized, and also coming to New Jersey, that the densely populated parts have the exact same structures and problems than in Switzerland. The only really big difference is public transport, which is really a problem here. So I'm extremely happy that transportation with public transport is present. Of course, in Switzerland, you can hop on a bus, on a train, wherever you are. We even have a card where we can access the entire net, including ships and the things that go up to the mountains with one pass. It's very liberating, and that's not the case in New Jersey. But you see already here, so Switzerland from the surface, it's the double of New Jersey. They have almost the same number of inhabitants, but a lot of mountains and lakes in Switzerland. So when you really come to the densely populated areas, you can actually really see some similarities. So sorry, it's and roads also. A lot of public transport in Switzerland, but also a lot of roads that you see very clearly here. And then I want to show you the next, if the slide is going. So on the left, you see a really iconic poster that every Swiss household had in the kitchen in the 1970s. It's about every year construction. It shows this little village of Güllen that you see here from 1959 to 1972, and how the landscape has changed. And you have in this building, I hope you see the red spot, the modern planners that had this idea, we bring like this, urban renewal and everything is wonderful and what a beautiful thing we do, and then you are ending up here. And I want to show, especially here, this is the rest that is for the children, where they have a little tree and the bench to sit. It says don't access the grass, of course. Then you have a little bunch of flowers. very much like New Jersey feeling, I would say, and in the 50s you had the entire landscape to play with. We have still spaces that look like this, but disappearing. So you see, I think, clearly the similarity. So about walking. So we are now working on a book, and we are supported by a foundation of Lucius Burkhardt. So he died in 2003. He was a macroeconomist, and he is the founder of the science of walking that he calls strolology or promenadology. Switzerland is a small country, so they have a lot of humor. They don't take themselves too seriously, but then still they're very serious. But I want to show you, I chose just like 3 authors. You, of course, in America know John Brinker-Jackson, the testifier of the vernacular in the American landscape, very much into cars he was, but he himself preferred to ride a motorcycle to have this exposure to nature. But and then we have a French philosopher, Michel de Certeau, the practice of everyday life. All of these 3 authors, so what connects them is that they deeply care for the everyday. They deeply care also for a practice of resistance through awareness of the everyday, and they are all kind of subversive. So what you also see here, so this is one of the books that came out, they are all translated now into English, but Burkhardt also said design is invisible. So sometimes the most important design intervention is how often the bus is actually coming to the bus stop that you designed. So so these are all these thoughts. And I just show you 2, a sketch and an aquarelle of Lucius Burkhardt, where you again see his humor. First of all, he says, we really have to acknowledge the contemporary landscape. So it's not like the Acadian spot. When you paint it, it's, more the power line and the nuclear power plant, but again, this is the landscape. We have to live with it, we have to appreciate it, and that's one of my favorite. He would say the promenadological context is destroyed. What does this mean? So in this rural setting, just from the context and your experience and the walking, this is a chapel in the countryside, but once the strip mall came, the chapel in the countryside has to put a big sign on it. I am actually a chapel in the countryside. This is actually what I am. And you see this a lot in strip malls. We have these like huge, maybe steak houses. They have plastic cows in the ground, So we have all these and it's the same with advertisement. Basically, when you have the cow and the milk, it's already over. So it's about selling these pictures once you have everything destroyed. And he's like, so how can we reinstall this promenadological context? And this is basically where we work, and I show you now the individual work of the 3 of us, and then also how they come together. I start with Caspar. So Caspar shared this. I show you 3 shots from his Instagram, because we all know Instagram is the form of communication now, also to reach people under 40. I was told Facebook is only for stalking people over 40. And we call Caspar the agionaut. You all know the Odyssey and the big Greek journeys in the Mediterranean and everywhere. And so basically Caspar is doing this in agglomeration, in suburbia. And so what you see immediately is this juxtaposition of the rural, the industrial, the residential, also the high-rise and the Swiss chalet. And that's also this charm that we find in suburbia, that things that don't go together come together. Yeah, and then what you also find, there is a lot of green space, but it's not often well connected, it's not well curated, and in general there's a lot of open space. And if you see his hashtags, so Zurich, the aglonaut, aglowanderer, this means walking in suburbia, Sunday stroll, but it's also on the go at home. It's really like what we do, our method, it's really go out in front of our own doors. Don't wait for the big, national parks. That's also wonderful, but we have to equally take care of these landscapes that are left over and that we think don't have this value. It's a re-evaluation of these landscapes. Caspar also worked on a very important book that came out. So it was a photographic observation of 15 years of Schlieren. Schlieren is a suburb of Zurich again. And they were really showing how Switzerland is changing, and is changing quickly. It has a lot to do also with the creation of affordable housing. But I show you one of these, series. So every 2 or 3, 5 years, they took a photo from the exact same standpoint. And this is the change over 15 years. And so it sparked a complete discussion on, what are we doing, how are we planning our environment, what do we actually do. Then Anne Brandl, I gave her this logo, aesthetic care, because that's really a term that she coined. And she says aesthetic care of urban landscapes means a critical acceptance of the extent and aesthetic attentiveness and the long-term process-based imparting of the landscape. So this is really what we advocate for. We do not want to submiss this, like reject and be condescending to these landscapes, but take them very seriously. For example, Caspar is an architect, these Swiss architects, they all have these Pritzker prizes and so on. They don't want to go into this urban sprawl, they don't care. But you say, no, you really have to go there. That's the place where you have to be. But then you accept it, but it doesn't mean you just leave it. It's a little bit like palliative care. You have a very sick patient, but you will not abandon it. You will stay with and it doesn't mean that the patient needs to die with palliative also, but you be there. And you have a process-based long-term effect, but also with kind of minimal interventions. So this is Anne Brandl when she was still a university professor. She has left academia and went back into planning. But this was her method with students. So they got up at 5 a.m. This is a good community building moment when you are at 5 a.m. in the morning shivering at the train station. Then you walk long distances, you walk for very long hours, you don't have a plan, you just wander around, and then at some places you sit down. They all took their chairs with them. And what they basically also, by sitting down in the center, like here in this underpath, sorry, you don't see, like you see underpath, or in one of these beautiful Swiss cities, in this case St. Gallen. But also the people who walked by were very interested. What are you doing? Why do you have an umbrella? And what is going on? And what are these stripes on it? And now you can write down what you want. And so this is already a mini form of creative placemaking. But they got really into contact with the community. They had a reflection on their own experiences and the experiences of others. They were relearning awareness and concentration. I mean, just think about phones and the war we have with our children of using the phones and putting them away, and to even, have this moment of immersive concentration in a landscape. You become aware of the space. And you gain a lot of knowledge through experience. I think we heard this morning, what wonderful knowledge the community has in experience, and how difficult sometimes it is to get them to these planners and policymakers. And it's also an idea to bring this together, and to already the students that we educate, tell them, you have to walk these places before you make decisions, because these are planning students. You have to listen to the community, to build it already into the curriculum of a university education. So when they become the experts, they still stay these lay people. And of course, you can also see from the pictures, it's really strengthening public space, and they become agents for change because they care and they have a feeling of responsibility. But this is not just happening and sitting on folding chairs and tralala. It's very serious consequences. So this is one of these planning projects from an agglomeration out of Lucerne. So Switzerland has, I cannot go into the detail, but they have a policy now that you're not allowed to build on open land anymore, because it's not like in America that you have 49 other states. Sorry, I know that are 50. But that you really, it's called increasing density inward. So whatever you do now, you have to build on the existing space. But they used, so first of all, a landscape architect did the initial plan. You see this on the left. Where are the green spaces? Where are the rivers? Where is the mountain? How does this even look like? And then the buildings follow the typology, the new buildings especially, of the existing landscape and the existing. They fill it up. But they also, for example, changed completely the typology of buildings. So once it's come down the mountain, they have flat horizontal buildings. They really try that all these settlements fill in a way to give a harmonious whole. They also use strategies. For example, when you go through a village and then you see a church tower, you are excited because you have a view shed on something exciting. So they made sure that they are planning in the way that while you walk in this new district, you have exciting moments of scenography. And this really comes from garden architecture and from walking, and it has this long tradition. This is what Lucius Burkhardt would call establish a promenadological context again, also for your orientation, and this is another feeling of home and belonging and wanting to live in a place. Then I show you how I came into this group. So I mean, we knew each other before that, but so I co-founded the Arts Integration Research Collaborative with the acronym AIR. We only do things outside. We welcomed Christine 1 year after our founding. We are very happy to have her now. It's a cross-school collaboration at Rutgers with professors from different schools. And so my main take is spatial justice and access. And I organized with my co-founder, Julia Ritter, professor in dance, the March to Rutgers Gardens in 2021. So as some of the local people might know, you have here Rutgers Gardens. I hope you see my pointer. It's a 180 acres resource. It's our biodiversity spot. It's planting collections, gardens, designed gardens, Hellier woods, so woodlands, natural habitat. They have a student farm, they have a farmer's market every Friday, and you cannot get there other than by car, because you see it's completely cut off with Riders Lane and US 1. But then, bringing all of our expertise together, actually there is a way, and it goes through a shutdown cow tunnel here under Route 1. So that's what the cows used to take, because they really wanted to have the cows to have access to both farms. And then basically we started with a dance land acknowledgement. We really choreographed a promenade of 2 miles. And it was a kind of also welcome back Rutgers event. And we wanted to raise awareness on Rutgers lands, because most of the people have never passed, even some of these buildings. They didn't even know that these lands existed. But also to educate on the resources. So for example, we had Fluxus events on Skelly Field. Fluxus is an international art movement, also very open participatory, right down our alley. It had a center at Rutgers. Not many people know that. The farms, they hadn't been in the farms. Then we have these wonderful resources. We had the theater department, the dance department, all working with us, and telling the stories of the natural world. It was all about climate change, about access, about also, who is left out if you need a car, and all these kind of things. And then we made people really, really excited. Actually, there is a path. You can walk if you would, fix this and have this cow tunnel and then have a crossing over Riders Lane. And I want to show you one video. So we asked Scott Ordway, a professor in the music department, to compose a piece for us in the cow tunnel. It was performed by the Voorhees Choir with several reasons. First of all, the Highway 1 is not only cutting off people, it's also cutting off the watershed. So he named his piece Watershed, and he compiled together with a biology professor all the names of plants and animals of the habitats, really of this local moment. And when you go into the cow tunnel, the chorus chants the name of species that have disappeared. And when you went out, species that have newly emerged. And this is really my one piece of strongly creative placemaking, because we said this cow tunnel is so uncomfortable and people really don't want to go in. But once you have experienced something like this, which is an artwork, you put it in your memory and you will never forget it. And it really becomes something different. And then this is a possibility of activating spaces. And I show you now this video. I hope it's going to start off. Let me see, here we go. And oh, sorry, next one. Yeah. So this is this really example of arts integration, how it works on the ground, how it works with connections and giving access and reinterpreting things. Then we continue to work with, this is a student project, very nice. She has the movement of the cows here and the movement of the people, and you see again the cow tunnel and the cows. And this is basically the final plan that they came up with. What could a path look like that would connect the student housing to Rutgers, passing the cow tunnel? We would like to have Bristol Myers Squibb on our side, that they can also go to the gardens during breaks, also have these possibilities that their staff can bike to work. And yeah, so we are really advocating very strongly for this. There is a possibility maybe of having a bridge. So we had a capstone project with the engineering students, but I'm not so much aiming for the bridge. I really think we could have a pathway over here. There's the Brandt Behavioral Health Treatment Center resident. It's newly opened. It's about to open. And in fact, it's really only a 20-minute walk, even if you go all down Riders Lane and up, and students could have access to fresh food with the farmer's market and food swipes. So we really try to convince Rutgers leadership to do that. And I'm on my end. I just show you what's coming up. This is a terrible like Google Maps shot, but with this group walking in suburbia, we are planning, it's going to happen, a curated hike of half a day. You see that if we walk straight, it's only 44 minutes. But these are the suburbs of Bern. Bern is the capital of Switzerland, and all the federal agencies, so the federal government is there. And as we have a very high standing with these people, you know, they think we are not fools. We get 5 people from the Federal Office for the Environment, 5 people from the Federal Office for Spatial Development, and 5 from buildings and logistics, which is very important because they build a lot. So if they understand how to do that and take the policies that we would like to, make them understand, then this will have a huge impact. And basically, we ask them each to present something. So we are certainly not doing this like straight walk. We are also roaming around and asking every federal agency to present something that they would like. And it's really, the idea is you cannot make a policy decision or a planning decision if you haven't walked the grounds, if you haven't met with the community. And also, sometimes agencies compete and they have maybe not such a good understanding. And we have a nice breakfast and a nice lunch. We are going to walk together. And so we hope that this will also build relationships between people that have to collaborate, and it has a real impact in real life for many, many people. And if they feel better and have this community building moment through the walk, then we hope that also the future of the policy making is better. And I'm very, very happy and lucky that Switzerland is so open to this, because this would be like, not like Joe Biden taking on a walk, but actually someone, in one of the ministries, and they say, no, we do it. I think that's a great idea. Let's do it. Let's also save our urban sprawl landscapes. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to try and be as succinct as possible because I want to get back into conversation with Dr. Freytag. My name is Swern. I'm the producing director for coLAB Arts here in New Brunswick. I also teach creative engagement for the School for Communications and Information at Rutgers. I teach graduate students and undergraduate students how to create unorthodox media making, opportunities for art making in communities for media distribution and local creative change. I'm a little all over the place in terms of my notes. I have iPad and paper, so thank you for picking that out for me. So let me just briefly introduce the organization. coLAB engages artists, social advocates, and communities to create transformative new work. We facilitate creative conversation through innovative programs and artist infrastructure, connect artists with community partners and mentors, and execute productions that challenge perceptions and inspire action. We believe that the possibility for transformation is made possible through an activated alignment of shared value stakeholders. And our first step in determining that alignment is by turning to our mission, who's the artist, or the facilitating artist, who's the advocate or change agent, and who's the community of benefit. This is out of order, I'm finding, so I'm going to find another way to do this. Cool, thank you. But generally I wanted to offer is that in terms of our largest resources available to our organization, time is a big piece of it. And we heard about it earlier this morning, that time can sometimes be an enemy. We can create impatience. But I wanted to share that when it comes to art making, time is your biggest friend, because you're trying to identify a time scale that's not only identified to the intervention, but it's identified to the community that it's in service to. That one intervention might happen briefly, but it's going to be reverberating for a long time afterwards. We believe in creative engagement, which we view as place-based and issue-based art making. It is justice-oriented. Just give me 1 second to pull up my notes here. Here we are. We work closely with local community development and advocacy organizations, integrating art making and storytelling to the mission and service work of its partners. Our principal programming includes artist residencies in non-arts, social justice, and community development organizations, public art creation through community engagement and deliberative facilitation, documentary theater performance and visual art in response to oral history collection, and arts education for elementary, middle, and high school students. We principally locally serve the New Brunswick Latinx immigrant community in the Esperanza and Unity Square neighborhoods through our bilingual programming and storytelling, oral history and arts education, and public art facilitation through organization partners New Brunswick Tomorrow and Unity Square. We serve trauma-informed and vulnerable populations through storytelling and creative workshops, including the Center for Empowerment, Middlesex County Sexual Violence Prevention Service, And we have statewide university collaborations with Rutgers, Monmouth University, and the University of Texas at Austin. I want to talk a little bit about project design. When we think about our creative interventions, there are three modalities in which we're typically producing work. One is studio practice, which is typically an artist working on their own, creating work in response to their own portfolio and their own experience. Social practice, where an artist brings in community members to help facilitate and produce work that is directly responsive to the entire consensus building of that project. And then civic practice, where you use creative intervention to help make strong creative change within that community. This work is not discipline specific and can engage artists of any medium, including music, dance, poetry, film, what have you. And then lastly, I wanted to bring up language we use called deliberative facilitation. We use grounded theory and community practice when we create work. We're not necessarily going into a community knowing what the story is going to be. We create a defined time, defined space, and we let our community tell us what the work should then become. Deliberative facilitation is derived from deliberative democracy, which is authentic deliberation. Remove all weighted decision-making based on unequal wealth or political power, and decision-making output is then consensus. Majority rule is used only when a consensus can't be reached. Deliberative facilitation leans more towards the idea of producing a spontaneous advisory board, where consensus is reached regarding the project narrative and social understanding. However, producing the creative response is the purview of the facilitator and the lead artist. Who is the artist or the facilitating artist, who is the advocate or change agent, and who is the community of benefit? That's defined in the room. Okay, so oral history, we heard a little bit about it this morning. For us, oral history is important for us as a socially engaged arts organization because we use life course oral history to document and archive all the narratives that happen through our work. We also recognize a responsibility as an arts organization producing public work, and we don't want to be the only narrative that exists publicly about the communities for whom we're creating these projects. As socially engaged artists, we believe that the first act of social change is to listen, that the narrators featured in our oral histories have gifted us incredible records of perseverance and survival in an effort to make our communities stronger and more resilient. And the why of the oral history work is that it's our way of understanding through first-hand account how racial and social justice issues affect our community. And I want to acknowledge Dr. Obrazel-Colvin, who's been a really great partner in understanding our work, especially when it comes to the impact on individuals who experience houselessness and economic vulnerability. The voices of vulnerable communities are rarely incorporated into their own history. For example, when we think about the history of America's houseless, there's virtually zero anecdotal evidence documenting their experiences. Rather, we have to rely upon police records, archives from churches and almshouses, and payroll records to give us an idea of employment and vagrancy patterns. Public school curriculum and textbooks suffer from that same narrative deficit. Oral history is radically important to shift the way thematic, historical, and social content connects to these underrepresented individuals, and by extension, the students learning that content. One thing I want to bring up quickly, and I'll lean it into it further in the presentation, is the way we think about research and the way we think about documentation. I believe that we as arts organizations, as service providers, take it for granted that our research partners have that history documented. It's not, and I'll go into an example of how that was really important in a moment. The first mural I wanted to introduce is called Eros Entre Nosotros. It's on Costa Chica on Handy Street in New Brunswick. This was produced in 2020, and the idea was we wanted to create an art project to celebrate all of the public art that had been happening in the Esperanza neighborhood for the last 4 years prior to. So this was actually designed as a socially engaged project where artists would be, community members would be participating with our lead artist, Duda Penteado, to create a mural collectively and all be painting on the wall. Has anyone actually ever participated in installing a mural before? Show of hands. 1, 2, 3. That is not enough. You all need to get in the street and get a roller in your hands. It's really a lot of fun. And the kind of community building that happens around it really is unique. But the pandemic happened in 2020, so we didn't do that. So we had to think of another way in which we could really lean into this idea of creating community and social impact through one mural intervention. And what we ended up doing is we created student workshops where we were actually doing virtual learning over the summer with about 150 students around the city through public schools as well as through youth groups. And what we ended up doing is we were asking students to decorate their own KN95 mask. And we were asking a very, very important question. What was your experience before the pandemic? What is your experience now? And what do you hope your experience will be afterwards? So we got very unique responses. And our artist and our team at coLAB took all of these masks, attached them to foam core tiles, and dipped it all in hardener and turned them into tiles. And so when we go to the mural, what you're actually seeing is 3 different visual experiences. One is, as a pedestrian, you are seeing the individual mask on the wall providing its own narrative related to one student in New Brunswick. If you're in a car, you are seeing this large call to action being Eros ante nosotros. This was based on an oral history that we did with one of our, with a narrator who was a woman named Roosevelt Pastrana. Some of you in the New Brunswick community might know who she is. But she was a doctor from where she came in Latin America and has not been able to practice medicine in the United States. But what she did do is she volunteered at these COVID clinics. And she would go home every day and spend an hour cleaning herself before she could hug her children at the end of every workday. And so she gave us this language that there are heroes among us, when she's referencing not only, of course, herself, but also the people like her within the Latino community who could not enjoy the benefits of being an American, but still felt compelled to participate in improving their community. And then there is also, so those aren't the 3 experiences. There's the historic, there's the current, there's the pedestrian, and then there is the street. Oh yeah, the street experience. Sorry, that's what I'm saying too. When it comes to mural design, not everyone has all the information, meaning you're gonna have a lead artist, they're not an expert in everything. You're gonna have a developer, they're not an expert in everything. So you try to come to consensus to reach the kind of visual experiences that really speak to the greater whole. So we were landing on this idea, we wanted to just put the masks in, but the reality is you have a wall in Costa Chica that is parallel to the street. Sometimes you will have a wall that's perpendicular to an intersection. And that way you can have different kinds of experiences. You can slow down and stop at the stoplight, and then you can see detail. But because this is parallel to the street, we needed a larger intervention that could be seen and acknowledged by those passersby, and that's how we landed on the larger message. Okay, this is 220 Sudan Street. This is a community garden that is managed by Unity Square, which is an NRTC project by received by Catholic Charities here in Middlesex County. The garden, how do I say this? It was an abandoned lot. There's lead in the soil, and they've been working very hard to maintain it as a garden, specifically for the Oaxacan community members that live and work in this neighborhood. So we were commissioned to do a few different intervention opportunities. One is we worked with Toby Horton from Landscape Architecture at Rutgers to redesign an opportunity for creating this garden into a more public space. And so he actually worked with his students through a studio about 6 years ago up in Parsippany. They took a house down that was, I think, destroyed by Hurricane Floyd. And they were able to salvage about 2/3 of the materials, and all of those materials ended up in this garden. Not all of them, but like materials from that house are now in this garden. We wanted to experiment with different kinds of access opportunities with this space. So those 2 first garden beds on the left, those are actually accessible beds that you can reach by either by chair or by wheelchair. But I will also say that the garden itself can only be accessed by walking up a 70-degree incline initially. So we brought in my partner, her uncle is a contractor, so he came in with a, what do you call it, an excavator and a dump truck, and we took out 3 dump trucks full of dirt, and it's all now in my backyard. But it's good because the house I bought was covered in tree roots, and it was not good for the kids. But we were able to replace all of that dirt with a really lovely paper trail that had been pulled from reused bricks that we found in the dirt underneath the actual garden. So that all of this had been fill that we tried to repurpose for its installation. And then on the right side, you can see that there's a modesty wall that now surrounds it. This is an empty lot. This was a row house that had been demoed by the city. So the property itself is still owned by the city, but it's given use for Unity Square. So we put up modesty walls, we put in benches. All those benches are dry boxes as well, so that tools and community materials, barbecue equipment can all stay in that site. The other half of this project was we actually conducted oral histories then with the community gardeners in native Spanish. And this happened through the pandemic, where we found out the narratives of why these individuals found it so important to continue urban gardening, what was their heritage with agriculture in Oaxaca, and what were the experiences that they wanted to pass on to their children. And we learned a lot through our research. We got firsthand accounting as to how NAFTA impacts the individual and how these families that were able to subsist and survive in Mexico pretty much had their entire lives upended by policy from the United States. This is a great comic book, by the way. It's gorgeous. Mary Nucci at School of Environmental and Biological Sciences has tons of copies, so definitely reach out to her, or reach out to me and I'll get them to you. Okay, this is our Unity Square street mural. This was a Bloomberg Philanthropies project, and we were looking at creating a traffic calming, pedestrian safety, as well as community safety intervention here in the neighborhood. So right below the photo, that's me in the second floor of an old firehouse that's been taken over by Unity Square. Okay, cool. And up the block, that way, up Sudan Street, is Sacred Heart Church, part of Holy Family Parish. And about 50 feet up that way to the left is where I lived for 5 years. So part of my interest in this particular intersection is there has been a decline, a very marked decline in this neighborhood, where when I had moved in, and this was right before the Trump administration came in, it was a very, very safe, family-oriented neighborhood. But when you start looking at crime reports within New Brunswick, you find that Remsen, which is this street here, is the source of most of the violent crime happening in New Brunswick. The church, unfortunately, even had to install security gates 3 years ago on their down walks because people were loitering and conducting illicit economy. My partner and I, we invited her sister to live with us for about a year, and she suffers from drug use disorder. And she was able to walk out of our apartment and buy heroin right in front of our house. So they're right outside of our apartment. So there are lots of concerns that I am anecdotally aware of, but more importantly was being reported to me through our community partners. And so it became important that this be the source of our intervention. When we created the opportunities for its development, we wanted to produce conversations that responded to different kinds of vulnerabilities. So we were talking about pedestrian safety, which Voorhees Transportation Center was very generous in helping walk us through how to build that tool set for our community. And we were able to teach both kids and families how to design their own safe intersection that they envisioned. And so through community partnerships, we spent a lot of time with the Sagrada Family Folkloric Dance Company at Sacred Heart Church, because it is a great space with lots of participation. And they brought us in a couple of times to actually just talk about the intervention opportunity. We also hired a team of survey conductors around the neighborhood who were working with us for about 5 months, and we got about 150 responses from community members about what public safety means for that neighborhood. But also importantly, I was trying to develop a new measurement tool for our use, and that's measuring community pride. It's a very hard idea, and so what I'm looking at is intersections in the data in terms of what community pride might actually mean. And what we found is that about 80% of people were looking to leave that neighborhood as quickly as possible. But on the flip side, 91% of people wanted to participate in its improvement. And that's what we think about when we think about community pride. We recognize and understand the vulnerabilities. We know we might not be safe right now, but we know that it can and should be better. And then I just wanted to show an example of what kind of research work we do when we think about public art intervention, particularly with street murals. This is literally a guy with a clicker sitting in a chair, counting the number of cars that go by anytime, documenting people speeding through the traffic light. They're cutting off people in the corners. All of that behavior gets documented and digested. And what ended up happening, I don't have a photo of it, is the city did actually install stanchions to improve the pedestrian access to this area. You can't actually see them here. They're these little guys anchored to the ground. And the idea was we used the mural to extend the sidewalk into the street to make it a little bit safer for people to make that crossing. Because importantly about Unity Square, they provide what's called the New Brunswick Community Food Pantry. And it's a client choice food pantry, I apologize. And essentially it's an alliance of several food pantries around the city that all leverage their resources and volunteers to provide access to food, almost like a supermarket for about 150 people a day. I think they're doing 2 days a week now in that space. So it became important that we were acknowledging that density of pedestrians. Okay, the last, is this the last? It might be one of the last. I think this might be the last era. No, Two more, this one and then one more, I promise. So the Lift As We Climb mural was a project that we developed in collaboration with New Brunswick area NAACP and other local partners through a commitment to tell the stories of our local Black community in New Brunswick. And we ended up working with an artist named Kelly Prevar to design a mural after she was taught how to do her own oral histories as well. And she leaned into the idea of featuring Fannie Lou Hamer as a representation of historic advocacy in the Black community here in New Brunswick and in New Jersey. The Lift As We Climb mural is on a building that is on one side of a parking lot with another wall opposed to it. What we're doing right now, and this is emerging from the work that we started with the Unity Square mural, is that we wanted to create an active conversation between these, I'm walking away from the microphone. We wanted to create a conversation between the historic Black and the more contemporaneous Latino immigrant community. Because what we are finding is that there is a tension, and that was one of the conversations that was held during that Unity Square mural installation process. There are resources that are being abundantly made available to the local Latino community, but there's also a history of displacement and under-resourced support for the historic Black community. So what is now happening is New Brunswick Tomorrow, our partner in the French Street neighborhood, is commissioning a mural to be in conversation with this one. And we are also hosting a summer of learning between these different organizations that we work with to create spaces for further understanding and dialogue that we hope continues and sustains through this process, beyond this process. This is Home Is Where We Make It. This is the mural in Highland Park that we commissioned as part of the Shelter Project, along with Dr. Russell Colton, Colin Yeager from Center for Cultural Analysis, and the New Brunswick Theological Seminary. This mural was built in response to narratives around refugee resettlement and support in Highland Park. And the intention of this mural was to create this idea of radical hospitality, wherein you have a community, you have a space that is safe to you where you live, but you are welcoming people who don't want to be here. And that is the idea, that it's not about bringing them in and having them assimilate. It's about bringing them in and giving them space to be comfortable. Because what they want to do is they want to be home. And that created a bit of a stir in Highland Park. I will say that this is the first mural we did in a overwhelmingly white space. And it brought up new challenges that we had not yet prepared for. When we create public art, we typically work with stakeholder groups to produce that work. But in this instance, what we learned is that we needed to create space to actually engage with people who might not have been part of that project development. And what ended up happening was a lot of online violence in terms of disparaging of the mural, disparaging of the idea that there would be a lack of white representation in a mural that they characterized as one about diversity. And then there was also vandalism of the mural that was both xenophobic and Islamophobic. What I will say is that the community came out in full force in response to these instances. We had about 200 people show up for a vigil that was largely hosted by faith leaders from around the community. But importantly, what I'm wanting to lead to is now what happens next. This mural has been restored. It's been clear coated. There are cameras now on the wall. I am not going to be doing any more murals in Highland Park for a while. And it's not meant to be a joke. It's very serious in response to the experience about who was around the table for this mural. We had lots of faith leaders here. We did not have Orthodox Jewish leadership through this process. And that was a problem. I'm a Jewish person myself, and I wanted to figure out why. And what the concern was is that there was a conflict of interest when it came to creating mural and artwork that was representative of your community. This is a community that is not looking to be revealed necessarily. And when it comes to anti-Semitism, when it comes to hate. And so what we discovered was that there actually was no interfaith space for the Orthodox community and the secular community in Highland Park to create dialogue. So my commitment to that community now is I am stopping any public art that is going to be representative of justice issues or other kinds of identity issues in Highland Park until that space is further defined and made available so that these kinds of issues can be responded to. So where we are now as an organization is we have built out our capacity because we were reaching a point where a lot of our production work was focused on the product. And now I am trying to create more time to sustain and develop these conversation opportunities. So the historic Black and Latino community dialogue in New Brunswick, the secular and Orthodox community dialogue in Highland Park. And hopefully we can create space where public art then starts to flourish because it's responding to joy, positivity, and inclusivity within those spaces. Oh, there it is, fine. Okay, the last thing I'll talk about is research, and then I'll move on, and then I'll try to bring Dr. Freytag back on. So this is a pedestrian crash hotspot in New Brunswick, looking at data from 2010 to 2023. Thank you, Jacob. I don't know where you are in the room, but Orange Transportation Center worked with me for both New Brunswick and Red Bank in terms of identifying spaces that could benefit from traffic calming or further creative intervention. This intersection here in New Brunswick was a shock to our community partners when they saw what the data looked like, but what I can tell you, Baldwin Street in the corner, I don't have a photo of it, I'm gonna walk away from the microphone, but we did a street mural here a few years ago, and the idea was to create one central space in the middle of Baldwin Street that could be used for performance, for community engagement, to actually shut down the street and do performances, gatherings. But because of this kind of data, we knew, and we saw it anecdotally, there are no crosswalks at this park. So what we ended up doing instead is we split the street mural to be one part here and one part here to address that major vulnerability. So what I said earlier is don't take for granted that there are people producing this research, because sometimes it takes an arts organization or an arts intervention to discover the data that's needed. The other thing what I wanted to bring up before that was sort of the most recent issue. When we do, when coLAB Arts produces public artwork in partnership with Public History, we work with student researchers to actually create records of the communities that we are serving. And what we found out, I was brought onto an email thread with city government, the library system, and the Mexican consulate, which is now in New Brunswick. And apparently there is no actual documentation of the history of Latino immigration in New Brunswick in any concise way, except for the report that we produced. And so I was brought in to share that documentation with the community. So I want to repeat this, do not take it for granted that the history exists. It needs to be investigated, reported, and produced as part of your process. Teatro Esperanza is our new Latino theater company that is focused on telling stories of our local community, decentering institutions, and teaching our community members to conduct oral histories themselves and produce theater work synthesizing those experiences. We conducted 20 oral histories in native Spanish last year, and we have a 10-person translation team, folks all over the world who are working with us to translate and transcribe these interviews. And they're looking at doing 30 new interviews this year. I say those numbers because I didn't realize this, but apparently it typically takes years for someone in an academic institution to produce that much anecdotal evidence within a community. And so, again, we don't take it for granted that we're building something special with this kind of ground-based work. And we're now introducing participatory action research through our partner at Caribbean Studies, Dr. Sebastian Leon, who is teaching our community oral historians how to conduct their own research. So look for those theater performances at the end of the summer and then at the end of the winter. And then the last project, brand new for New Jersey, is New Brunswick Documenters. This is through an organization in Chicago called City Bureau. It's a very simple task that they train and pay people to go to city council meetings and record them. And that's it. And the reason why that becomes important is because transparency of government is incredibly important for forwarding social justice. As an arts organization, we find that creating as much source material for a creative response and intervention is incredibly important. And we also have the capacity to do this. I've been a fan of this program for 7 years, and it just came to New Jersey. New Brunswick is the first site, and New Jersey Alliance for Immigrant Justice, and Newark is the other site. It's simply that. We are going to be paying people to show up to city council meetings in New Brunswick, housing authority meetings, county commissioner meetings, and we're going to be translating them into Spanish. Because the media deficit is not just an English-speaking issue, it is a language justice issue. And I'm looking forward to reporting on that process later this year. Thank you.
Okay, and this is with respect to the Highland Park. Why not simply include Orthodox Jews in the mural? And that might help to people with some of the gentlemen there.
I'm sorry.
Can you just repeat that a little bit slower?
Yes, this was about the mural in Highland Park.
Yes, please.
You mentioned issues surrounding exclusion of Orthodox Jewish people. And I was wondering, why not, include Orthodox Jewish figures in the mural, and that might have helped.
Sure, yeah. Just to repeat it quickly, the question was, why didn't we include representation of Jewish people in the mural? And the intention was because we wanted to be specific with the narrative. It was meant to be contemporaneous refugees being resettled by Interfaith Rise, which is a project of the Reformed Church of the Affordable Housing Corporation at the Reformed Church of Highland Park. The contemporaneous refugee communities are coming from Eritrea, Saudi Arabia, that part of the country, part of the world. The actual mural was meant to reflect that. So there's a constellation in the background. There's a field of stars, and it reflects the constellations that are actually seen in that part of the world. So the intention of the narrative of that mural was specific. And I think we probably could have done a better job in terms of bringing that to the larger community in Highland Park. I will say we did bring that narrative very intentionally to borough government, and it was thrown out the window and something else was said instead. But there is work that we need to be doing. But one thing that did come out of that process that's also new for us is we haven't typically tried to staff additional people at those murals. Essentially, you have an individual who has their back to the street and they're facing the wall. The artist, Emerson Orangian, who worked on that mural, was racially harassed 3 times over 3 days in that space while she was working. And so we've now made it part of our process where when we have an artist working, there is always at least someone, like in a lawn chair, facing away from the mural so that they can be the first person that people go to. Just because, again, with your back to the street, it creates a vulnerability that we hadn't really needed to think about in the past. But it's going to be an opportunity because since we're now building out this process, it's now an opportunity for spontaneous events, community building, actually inviting groups of people to show up for the mural that's being installed and actually address the themes and narrative of that project.
When you were doing your project, did you actually have conversations with folks in the community before you started?
What can you explain community?
Well, where the mural landed, it impacts the direct community that's looking at the mural, whether they live across the street or the businesses across the street.
Sure.
So, before you do the mural, do you actually have conversations with the neighbor community where that art piece is going to have some kind of impact?
Sure. Yeah, we worked with Main Street Highland Park, which is the main commercial service organization for the businesses in that area. So they were involved in the conversation the entire time. And then also, what we do is we bring the design work to public spaces for comment, like Post-it notes, responses, the farmers market in Highland Park as well. But to my earlier point, the intentional spaces that we create for conversation, we've designed it so that it's responding to the stakeholder groups and the communities of impact that are being represented in the mural. That process needs to be altered.
I think you said something earlier. I also live in Highland Park, not so long, but you said something along the lines that the Orthodox community is very strong, but also not. It's not that you said visible, but it's a community that doesn't want to become visible, and I think that's also my experience. There is no wish for an interaction, and so in a way it's a strange situation. So I can understand the difficulty. It's hidden in plain sight, something like that.
Right, and when I say that, it's not based on like a hunch. Or I've met with local leadership, Rabbi Miadonik from Habas Achim on First Avenue also, and we had a dialogue about what the concerns were about it. And then even presenting the idea of, well, let's do some intentional public artwork for this community. The response was, we don't want that. Mm-hmm. We don't want public art reflective of our community. I live in that community also, I should say.
Yeah. Other questions?
I'll just ask
Of
one.
course,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I guess I'll try to bridge both of your talks, and I'm not going to talk about Highland Park, even though I also am a resident of Highland Park. Half the people here probably live in Highland Park. I'll talk about New Brunswick. Can I do that and across the river? So in your intervention on Baldwin Street, or I guess it's adjacent to or part of is it a city-owned park or county-owned facility?
It's a city park.
City park.
See, that street is actually it's a county street.
Right, in the triangle piece. And that corridor, basically the Albany Street corridor, in terms, basically splits off on the Joyce Kilmer Avenue. That's a corridor that is really amenable to a walk, to an exploration, an urban exploration. And Dr. Freytag, you talked about suburban and maybe even rural walks, but here I can see a lot of your lessons and intentionality along an urban and a dynamic and changing environment. And how might you bring some of the tools that that your students are doing in other, Switzerland and elsewhere, to a more urban context or a suburban context? And then maybe, in those interventions, how can you identify some of those interventions through that walk? I don't know if that is a good question. That's great.
No, and I think the method, you can use it in every context. It's just like we took the parts that were the most neglected and tried to really find the qualities in it. And one reason is, of course, because there is green open space. So this idea, because I'm from landscape architecture, so there's actually this like open space, and how can you activate it? Because even here, you just have to show when you go down Route 1, like all the ups and downs of Route 1, where you come and go, there's so much green space. Also here, everywhere in New Jersey, and we all feel we don't have green space. We don't have, where do we have it? And it's just like, these whole things that you build, these huge boxes, and then there's green around the next box, and so I think there's so much potential. That's basically, I talked about this palliative care. It's a bit, provocative, of course, but that's why we went to these spaces. But you can absolutely do this in urban space and others. I think it's really a little bit, I apply it in New Jersey, but it comes out from the European perspective in it is that Europeans take a lot care, usually of their cities and not so much of the suburbs. And here I learn it's really the other way around. The communities that need most care live in the cities. And so there's we really think also, I didn't present it here, but we built a pilot garden for people with disabilities at Jones Avenue near this farmers market. But Meredith Taylor, with whom I worked, she's the director of all these farmers markets, she said Rutgers would really need an urban extension. I'm from SCBS, we have all these extensions, but they are all in the suburbs and they're all white, in a way they serve white communities. And she says, who is serving the black and brown communities? We have to have the urban extensions in Rutgers that serve the cities. And this is for me a discovery, because I lived, this is my 6th country, but I lived in 5 other European countries, and usually the cities were not, they had their problems, but they were not like an underserved community. This wasn't a city. This was somewhere else. And that's the flip. That's why we made this decision.
I think one of the saddest things about, we'll start with on a happy note. I think one of the saddest things about the way New Brunswick has developed over the last 30 years is that it is a riparian city that's denying itself. That we are a city on a river that should have so much more access and economic opportunity related to its river. I love that you're talking about strollology, because I love having language to describe what we do in certain respects. We had a project that we did with what is called Sustainable City Design Academy out of the American Architectural Foundation. And we were looking at how we can reconnect the downtown area of New Brunswick to the river. And we started doing walks, and we realized, there's only one place on George Street where you can actually see the river. There's one street all the way down by Elijah's Promises Community Garden called Promise Garden, where you can actually see a little bit of water. Otherwise, you have no clue. Not even from Albany Street can you see it, because it's blocked off by the highway, and then you have the Hyatt, and you have Johnson & Johnson focusing yourself back to the street. Anyway, what I wanted to bring up to your direct question about French Street, you should have this beautiful gateway that connects you to this environmental opportunity. But also, there is always going to be a tension between economic development and residential development. And you see that with the hospital. I hate walking French Street, getting from George Street to the community that we serve. That is the most oppressive place I think I've ever been outside of like a parking deck in New York City. It is very unfortunate. And like it's a wind tunnel. You can't see anything other than the face of that building. The actual overpass for the train is dilapidated and gross. And oh God, we've envisioned lighting installations down there for years of wanting to do some kind of public art intervention. But that only gets you to the next wall. So like, what's the value of it? So in terms of creating these kinds of walks, I think we're really reliant upon creative intervention opportunities to help bridge us between these otherwise desirable places. I love French Street. One thing that we sort of, language to describe it came out of one of our more recent murals. You might have seen it, it says Latido del Corazón de la Ciudad on the side of the wall. It's like there's the big heart on it and like sort of references to past businesses that are no longer there. One of the big like aha moments that we had through that process was just sort of identifying the different commercial areas of the city and how they're identified. George Street is very much responsive to the corporate interests in the city. Easton Avenue is very much responsive to the student community and their needs. But French Street has always responded to the residential community in the city. That's really powerful to know, to understand, and then find ways to support. So if you wanted to create a walking tour or a pedestrian pass through French Street, I think you center it around this idea that it is the heartbeat of the city. And then how does French Street then find its way into other places? Recenter French Street to the rest of the city.
So I would have a question to you. First of all, I will give you all the books of Burkhardt translated. I'm the global ambassador for Burkhardt. I loved your presentation and I really admire your work and it's fantastic. I mean, I basically, now that after I became food professor and I moved here, I got much more into, I mean, I've always been an activist, but not to that extent. So now I really do community engaged work, and it's the hardest thing I ever did in my entire life, but it's also the most rewarding. So my question to you is, I mean, Rutgers, it's like a silo in itself. I mean, we have a police, we have a hospital, we have a credit foundation. I mean, it's a state in a state. And I really feel the more and more I work here, how hard it is to get to serve the community of New Brunswick and the local communities, and also to get into contact. That's why we also, with Air Collaborative, said we are really serving the New Brunswick and local communities. And so, and you said, you know, I see the power of the arts intervention. I think we have a lot of, you know, thinking in common. So what would you think, what would need to happen in Rutgers? So how can we, as the Rutgers professors, we already try, but also like rally other colleagues, first of all, to maybe have these possibilities of having students do research, and I think a lot of Blaustein, because you are our host today, but also that we can, you know, bridge that there's a feeling like if also these local communities feel like abandoned or forgotten by Rutgers. It's just a feeling that I have, but you might know more about it. And how would you think a future of this university, because it is so important for also New Brunswick and the whole thing, to better serve the local communities and do a better job in that.
Sorry. One thing I wanted to just emphasize is this point about how Rutgers has its own isolated services. It's not only isolated. Rutgers Emergency Management Services is the actual center of emergency management services for the city and for the local community. What that means, when you call 911, when it pings the local law enforcement, it pings Rutgers. It doesn't ping New Brunswick. Because Rutgers is so resourced and has such a large community of service. They're the ones that have these kinds of infrastructure opportunities. The other thing I'll bring up to that point is the Rutgers Master Plan that was published, I think 6 years ago. I had the privilege of being in sort of a shared editorial room between the local papers, My Central Jersey, North Jersey, that was organized by Free Press, and they'd asked the question, what is the biggest story that we missed this year? This was when it was published, and I told them it was the Rutgers Master Plan. And the reason was it was not talked about because it was coming from a very university institution-centered place, and it was looking at improving transportation between the campuses. Now, before I move on, let me just say something about a university that I actually have a lot of respect for in the way it thinks about infrastructure, and that's NYU. Totally like taking over real estate in that area, but it is very centralized. It is building up. It is looking at how it can concentrate its services. New Brunswick, if it's looking at creating greater transportation infrastructure, is going to have a negative impact on the communities that it then passes through. It's going to blight the neighborhoods further than they already are hurt because the streetscapes pass them by, and there's no opportunity for university presence. What I would say that the greatest change that needs to happen in terms of service to the city is that the university needs to reframe its research less as extractive from the community and more as direct service to the community. If you think about New Brunswick as the place where you can make change most immediately and most effectively, as opposed to thinking larger regionally impact, create your laboratory in New Brunswick, show sustained engagement, sustained presence, and that would make a huge difference. And more importantly, it'll teach your students to think that way as well. Because right now, I get a lot of seniors and they have no concept of what I'm talking about. And that's really unfortunate that they get to me then and they have no idea what I'm talking about. Did I respond to the question?
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
Yes.
So it's interesting because me and Walsh just have a little sidebar here. I used to work in New Brunswick and lived in Somerset. And used to do interaction or business with Johnson & Johnson. Back in those days, Brunswick and Rutgers and Johnson & Johnson had this sort of culture of interacting with the communities as they were talking about housing development and commercial development. So it's interesting to hear that there's a disconnect between the new development and the question that comes up, who's the development for? And how are you thinking about engaging, reconnecting the grassroots groups to what's coming, how that's impacted, how they can be a part of and benefit from the development that's occurring so that they're not pushed out or cast aside or feel like they can't take advantage of or be a part of what's happening.
I have a direct response to that one. There's a question I wanted to ask you about related to that as well, is that the exact question you're talking about is now reflected in the bifurcation of services that have happened in the city. So the best example that I can give you is what was a project in 1974 called New Brunswick Tomorrow. New Brunswick Tomorrow was a development process that started along what's now Route 18, and it removed buildings in service to changing the actual demographic landscape of the city to benefit the executive needs of Johnson & Johnson and their world headquarters. The bifurcation I'm talking about is that part of that process was then the creation of and I think someone from law school will correct me if I say anything wrong here, but in terms of the history, but what happened was they had created a mixed public-private partnership called DevCo to actually lead the development work for this new process that started in the 70s, and we're still in its final phases of it right now. It's not completed yet in terms of the plan. But New Brunswick Tomorrow, as its own nonprofit, and DevCo have split. DevCo now operates more as a private entity with mixed-use public support, and New Brunswick Tomorrow is the entity that now focuses on social services. They've created a neighborhood revitalization tax credit neighborhood in the Esperanza neighborhood here. Now they're working on another one further down Livingston Avenue towards North Brunswick. But I think what the question you bring up is that there
there is little work that I can do right now when there is so much financial investment caught up in a community that does not currently live here. We're now bringing in Nokia Bell. Again, this is a new population of people that are going to require services and don't necessarily require further investment in the residential neighborhoods around the downtown. So I think there are smarter people in this room than me who can talk further about this. This is just purely what I've talked about thought about and talked about in our narrative work. But what I wanted to bring up is we've done walking projects going from the downtown to these areas that have already been displaced and largely following environmental decline. So there are culverted streams that go from like the Henry Guest House, which was the historic tannery in New Brunswick, all the way down through what's now the Hope 6 housing, and all the way down to Route 18. And if you go down to George Street, if you go to like a grate and you hear running water, that's an historic stream that's been covered because of the streets. So what we're talking about in terms of actually doing complete improvement and service to the communities that need it, it's a gut of our infrastructure. And it's so much financial, it's exhausting even thinking about it on my end. But in terms of services, it's gonna require an entire reframing of leadership, in my opinion. Dr. Freytag, I'm curious if you can speak to what tools are available to sort of help bring community leadership into those spaces effectively with an open mind and sort of respond to the environmental implications.